Hi, 8th grade. We are on Unit G, Concept 1, Simplifying Algebraic Expressions. So how we simplify algebraic expressions is we always have to combine like terms. So a like term is right here at the top of the page. It says like terms such as 3t, 4t are like terms because they have the same t, the same variable. Or 3m cubed and 2.5m cubed are like terms because they not only have the same variable, but the variable's raised to the same power. So like terms have the same variable raised to the same power, the same exponent. So to simplify an expression means to combine or collect its like terms to form an equivalent expression with as few terms as possible. So you can use number properties to combine like terms. So for our first example, we're going to write and simplify single variable expressions. It says Alex bought 2.5 pounds of apples and Derek bought 3.5 pounds of apples. Write and simplify an expression that represents how much they spent on apples. So first thing, we want to write an expression for how much Alex and Derek spent on the apples. So P is the price of the apples. So Alex has 2.5 pounds times the P, and Derek had 3.5 times the price. So now we have 2.5 P's and 3.5 P's. We can add those together because they have the same price. The P is the same. So we want to think about 2.5 plus 3.5. And this is using the distributive property to go from this to this is the distributive property. So now I can think 2.5 plus 3.5 is 6. So the expression, and we still have the p's, 6 times the price, or 6p, represents how much they spent on apples. So we'll reflect 1a says, suppose that apples sold for 90 cents per pound. Evaluate the original expression to find out how much Alex and Derek spent on apples. Then evaluate the simplified expression, and are the amounts the same? Well, I hope they're the same. So it's saying to take 2.5 times 90 cents and 3.5 times 90 cents. So that would be 45, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. And then we move the decimal point 2 spots. And then 3.5 would be 27, 28, 29, 30, 31. And then we move the decimal point 2 spots. So $2.25 plus $3.15 adds up to $5.40. And then it wants to see, well, is the price, which is 90 cents, times 6 the same amount? 9 times 6 is 54. Move the decimal points. So it's $5.40. And we get the same exact answer if we do it this way or we use distributive property. Okay, at the bottom of the page you have a try this. I want you to try and do it on your own. The lines next to property is you need to be thinking about each property, because as you get further into algebra, we always have to prove that we're allowed to do that by the properties. So try and think about which property you're using. Press pause and then come back and see if you got it right. Okay, so the answer simplified is 9.4n minus 10. We can't combine these two terms because there's no n with the 10. So that's as much as we can do. But if we go back to the beginning, I started with distributive property by taking the outside number and multiplying it by everything inside. That's how I got the 10. And then I just moved the 7.4 in here. And then commutative property, we use commutative to switch places with the 7.4 in and the 10 so that I have my ins together. And then the associative property, I put parentheses around those two so I know to do those first. Distributive property, I took the in out because they both had it. And so I could just add 2 plus 7.4 to get 9.4 in. And we couldn't do anything with the minus 10. Okay, for example 2, we're going to talk about writing and simplifying two variable expressions. So Devin bought 2.5 pounds of mixed nuts and 1 3/4 pounds of cheese for the class party. At the same store, Kim bought 1.5 pounds of cheese and 1 1/4 pounds of mixed nuts. Write and simplify an expression that represents how much they spent in all. So first thing, we want to write an expression for how much Devin and Kim spent. We're going to let M, the variable M, be the cost per pound for the nuts, the mixed nuts, and C is going to be the cost per pound for cheese. So Devin bought 2.5 pounds of mixed nuts and 1 3/4 pounds of cheese. Kim bought 1.5 pounds of cheese and 1 1/4 pounds of mixed nuts. And I got all that from the problem. Now we want to add both expressions to represent the total amount they spent. So I'm going to just fill that in again. 2.5, 1 3/4, 1.5, 1 1/4. And now I want to use commutative property to move my M's together, the nuts together, and I want to put the cheeses together. And so commutative property will switch places, so I can put my 1 1/4 here, and then my 1.5 cheese with the 1 3/4. So commutative property moves it, and then associative property will group them together so that I do the mixed nuts together and the cheese together. And then now I can take, because they both have an M here, because that has an M and an M, I can take that out because of distributive property. So I have 2.5 and 1 1/4, and I do the same thing with the cheese. So now I can add together the 2.5 and the 1 1/4 together, and I can add the 1 3/4 and 1.5. For some reason, they do want me to change these to improper fractions, which isn't a big deal. Seems like an extra step to me. But we take the outside number, multiply it by the bottom, add the top. So 2 times 2 is 4 plus 1, and the denominator stays the same. Same thing with 1 1/4. 1 times 4 plus 1 is 5/4. And over here, 1 3/4. 1 times 4 plus 3 is 7/4. And then 1 times 2 is 2 plus 1 is 3/2. And now I want to multiply the fractions to equal 1, which means because we're adding them together, I just need a common denominator. So this is more like finding a common denominator. So I look at this and they both have, I have a 2 and I have a 4, so I can think about, I can multiply 2 by 2, and I have to do this, whenever you do the bottom, you do the top, and then they'll have the same denominator, a 4, and then the same thing over here. I have a 2 and a 4, so 7/4, and I need to multiply the 2 times 2 to get 4, and whatever I do at the bottom, do the top. So now I get 10/4 plus 5/4 and 7/4 plus 6/4. So now I have 15. Okay, so all they want us to do is find a common denominator. So what I'm thinking of is, since I have a 2 and a 4, I can multiply this by 2. Whatever I do the bottom, I do the top. That way they have a common denominator of 10/4 plus 5/4. And then over here, I have a 4 and a 2, so I want to multiply that by 2. Whenever you do the bottom, you do the top. So I get 6/4, and I leave the 7/4 alone. So now I can add my numerators. 10 plus 5 is 15. Move this up. And the C's would be 7 plus 6 is 13/4. And I could simplify this and change those to proper fractions. So that would be 4 goes into 15 3 times with 2 left over. I'm sorry, 3 left over. M plus 4 goes into 13 3 times with 1/4 left over. So the expression 15/4 M plus 13/4 C represents how much Devin and Kim spent on mixed nuts and cheese. Or this answer also. Whoops, I forgot the C. Okay, on the reflect at the bottom, it says, what are the advantages of the simplified expression over the original expression, over the simplified expression? So we have, a simplified expression, when we simplify them and put all the m's or all the variables together, a simplified is easier to evaluate, to solve when we're given the values. Original can show each, show what each value is. So when we combine them, we don't necessarily know how many go with each person or whatever the problem would be. In 2b, it says, how is simplifying expressions with 2 or more variables like simplifying expressions with 1 variable? So it's using, how are they like simplifying? So we use commutative and associative properties and distributive properties. To combine. Okay, on the back of the next page, you have one try this. I want you to press pause, try it out on your own, and then come back and see if you got it right. All right, the answer was 4 1/4 x plus 14y. I first just copied the problem, and then I used distributive property to take the 5 and multiply it by everything inside the parentheses. And I did that work right here. 2 1/5 is 11/5 times 5. The 5's canceled out, and I was left with 11/1, which is 11. And then I use commutative and associative property to get my x's together and put parentheses around them, and get my y's together and put parentheses around them. Then I use distributive property to pull the x out and pull the y out. So I had 5 minus 3/4 times x, and then 11 plus 3 times y. And then over here I did the 5 minus 3/4. I had to borrow from the 5, have 4 left, and 4 4/4 is equal to 5. So 4/4, take away 3/4 was 1/4. And so I had 4 1/4 x's, and 11 plus 3 is 14y. All right, on the next page, on the back of the next page, you have your summary and hot question. You need to answer those. And then the practice right under this to the next page is for classwork. I'll see you then.